Hello, welcome back to the Matt Phifer Experience. I am your host, Matthew Phifer, and I have on a very special guest today. I have on Megan Drury from GRGB Law out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I'm going to kick it over to her shortly. Someone I ran into on Instagram and really enjoy their content. You guys know how we operate here. We don't allow people on here that I wouldn't hire myself or that I wouldn't recommend to friends and family. So Megan, thank you very much for hopping on. I'm going to kick it over to you. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So, I am a family law attorney here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I work for a firm, Gimbel, Riley, Guerin, and Brown. And how did I get into family law? So, I initially thought I wanted to kind of take the mental health route and be a therapist. And so I went to grad school. I got my master's degree in social work, did the mental health track. And then while I was in grad school, I worked for the state public defender's office and did an internship with them and really liked that. Thought, why not go the law school route? Went the law school route. And now I am here exclusively practicing family law. So that is how I got here.
When, that's every attorney I talk to, they always back into family law and one way or another. They always start out with one, in one direction, and then they end up in another direction. I think you might be the first person or the second person I've talked to that started down therapy route. Now, I've been, people have told me multiple times I should have became a lawyer and attorney. Do you notice any patterns or any similarities or skill set that a therapist might need? How am I wording this? That a therapist could use, like someone who would be going down that path that translates to a lawyer easily?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap in these two fields, whether it be therapy or being a family lawyer. I mean, kind of the heart of both fields, I think, is that you are counseling someone through really hard times, right?
Yeah.
As a therapist, either, or in family law when someone's going through a divorce. And so I think there's a lot of overlap there in terms of, having good empathy skills, listening skills. A lot of times people just want to be heard and to have someone listen to them and kind of counsel them through these hard times. So I think there are a lot of skills that are transferable.
Do you feel like it gives you an advantage or maybe even a disadvantage with when you are going against other attorneys? I think the perception is that that therapists are really soft, right? And sometimes even too empathetic, sometimes maybe even a pushover, where the thought process, or at least the stereotype, is that an attorney is a shark and pushy and those sorts of things. Have you noticed that those things are true? Have people tried to pull you over because of your background or because you have so much empathy? Or is that just a stereotype that a lot of people just misconstrue?
I think it might be a stereotype. I mean, I've yet to be bullied or, eh, also in the courtroom, I feel like a lot of lawyers on the other side might not even know my background.
Yeah.
I certainly think it gives me an advantage in terms of working kind of one-on-one with clients. I think that's where it really shines.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I think also in terms of, a lot of times in family law, we are getting psych evals done of individuals and working with psychologists and therapists and co-parenting counselors. And in that realm, I certainly think it gives me a leg up. But I also wouldn't consider myself,
Yeah.
a pushover or soft in court. Like, I think I can manage both roles and
I think that both of us as former therapists
yeah.
or heading down that track, the reality of therapists is that, we're really good at setting boundaries. And so, yeah, the perception might be that but when push comes to shove, like, you better watch out.
Right.
It's kind of
Yeah.
like what I always think.
Yep.
When it comes to family law, and I'm going to touch on your background again a little bit. I think it's very common for people to call their ex a narcissist or bring up, and sometimes there really is actual some mental health that aspects that are happening, right? Bipolar, addiction, substance abuse. And one of the things that we learn and when we're becoming a therapist is that even people who struggle with a mental illness still have rights. And I think that's a lot of times what people struggle with in family court is that they think that that's going to be the end all be all. Even if they do get that psych eval and the psych eval says that they're struggling with this mental illness or that mental illness, and they think it's just going to be an end all be all, when in reality, that person still has rights and it might have, some aspects of handling the case, but oftentimes it's not what the person was expecting. Have you seen a lot of that? Is that something that can you speak to your experience with that?
Yes. So I think you are spot on in that a lot of individuals in going through a divorce or any sort of family law litigation think, if I can pinpoint, what this other person, might be going through, whether it's substance abuse or mental health issues, that means I get more placement time with the kids,
Mhm.
right? Like that's the slam dunk in court that we need. Oh, they have bipolar, I should get primary placement. But while that may be a factor for the courts to look at, I think the court cares less about whether or not someone is diagnosed with either substance abuse issues or, a mental health diagnosis, but are you treating that?
Yeah.
So are you regularly seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist? Are you compliant with your medication? That's really what I think is important for either a guardian ad litem to look at or a judge. Is this person taking care of themselves and
Yeah.
doing what they need to do? So it's not going to be a slam dunk.
So I think that a lot of people feel like that's unfair when they feel like it's their ex that might be going through that. But I think that's something that doesn't get talked about is that sometimes we forget that sometimes we're the ones that need those rights, that we're the ones or the person that you might be representing is the person who's actually struggling with a mental health issue. They might be the one who's bipolar. And when you look at it that way, and I say bipolar, but any other mental illness as well, right? That it doesn't mean that you're a bad parent, doesn't mean that you don't have rights to children, but I think there's also a fear that your ex is going to say those things and that your kids are going to be taken away from you or it's going to be weaponized against you. Have you seen it on the flip side of it as well, where it's being weaponized against your client?
Yes, very often actually. And what I always tell clients is, we have to face the reality that you're in right now. If you are diagnosed with something, that's fine. I mean, it's you and, most of the population at this point in time.
Mhm.
Let's kind of address what it is and what you need to do to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and that you're
Mhm.
addressing everything you need to so that it doesn't impact your divorce case because there are a lot of parents out there who have bipolar or anxiety or depression. In fact, it's probably normal to be experiencing anxiety and depression when you're going through something like this. What can you do to make sure that it's not going to impact your divorce case and
Yeah,
not impact any sort of determination of custody and placement?
yeah, absolutely. And I think that this happens a lot of times also with domestic violence. And, we've seen a rise in domestic violence cases. You and I were talking about that before we started recording about how common that is. That's something that is not only near and dear to this platform's heart, but also a lot of people who listen to this have been through it. Um, but unfortunately, we've also seen where people may weaponize domestic violence against people, may put out false restraining orders, make false claims, things of that nature. Um, are there ways that the court system are able to see the difference, notice the difference between things that are false versus things that are reality?
So it's a tricky question. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if someone files for a restraining order against someone else
Mhm.
and it ends up, at a hearing, either in front of a court commissioner or a judge, they're that person is the one who's making the determination as to credibility and, did domestic abuse actually occur or not? We do oftentimes see these allegations being used as weapons in divorce cases because if someone is hit with a restraining order and it's granted, there's basically an automatic statutory presumption that the parent who was a victim of domestic abuse should get sole custody so that they
Mhm.
are not having to interact with their abuser in terms of making, custodial decisions.
Right.
And so, I mean, there are very often times when domestic violence is a real issue in divorce cases, and I don't want to minimize that at
Right.
all. But like you said, there are cases where it can be weaponized, and I think bringing that to the court commissioner's attention or the judge's attention that, look, there are times when this can be weaponized, and trying to kind of get that into their mind when they're making the determination as to, are these credible allegations? Did it actually occur?
Right. I think that, when people hear that, or when people are, when they have really actually experienced it, I know that I've worked with people where they feel like their attorney, quote unquote, doesn't believe me. The courts don't believe me. And but because from what I'm hearing, it's not so much that you're believed or not believed, but there's enough cases and there's enough situations where there also are false allegations that people have to do their due diligence. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yes, certainly. And I think that's kind of what happens when you go to a court hearing and, someone is testifying about what happened and the judge or commissioner is determining, is there enough there to, find that domestic abuse occurred?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and when when they do find that to be true, that there is that the allegations are indeed factual, um, what tends to happen? Like, is that like just a blanket, like that means that the other person's 100% going to get full custody of the children? Like, what is it still going to be somewhat of a battle, even if they do see that there is domestic violence in that situation?
So it certainly doesn't mean if you are, hit with a restraining order and if it's granted, it certainly does not mean you won't see your children. And
Right.
in fact, in Wisconsin, and I can only speak to Wisconsin, that's where I am certified or licensed to practice. There are only statutes in terms of domestic abuse kind of impacting custody or custodial decision making. And so that's different from physical placement, which is where a kid actually spends his or her physical time with mom or dad. And so if there's a restraining order in place, there's a presumption that the victim parent will get sole custody so they can make the decisions. There's no kind of presumption that the victim parent is going to get primary placement or have the children primarily placed with them. So it doesn't have that impact in terms of being able to see your kids. There is that presumption that the victim parent will get to make the decisions, but now that's rebuttable, and someone who did have a restraining order granted against them can take a certified domestic violence course.
Mhm.
um, and once they pass that course, then you can essentially rebut that presumption and ask the court for joint custody.
Yeah. Megan, this has been absolutely, absolutely amazing. You are a wealth of knowledge. There are so many different things that, I feel like people have learned in terms of like their rights, in terms of I think it's also important to know, just like we talked about, that people forget that the other parent has rights too, and that also can have an impact on people's case. Can you tell people where they can find you at, especially if they're in Wisconsin, especially if they're in the Milwaukee area, and they want to
Yes.
find out more about you, they want to find out more about your firm, um, and where they can find you at?
Yes. So I am at Gimbel, Riley, Guerin, and Brown, practicing in the family law department. You can find me on our website, grgblaw.com. We are also on Instagram, I believe, although I don't run our page. But I think the website would be the best place to find me, find my contact info, and reach out for a consult.
And if you are watching this, make sure you guys go down to the comment section down below. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, make sure you guys go down to the comment section down below. Let us know a takeaway, something that you may have learned from today's episode. Also, make sure you guys go over to her social media and let her know, show her some love, give her likes, follows. And also, if you're in the Milwaukee area, make sure you guys contact if you guys need assistance in your divorce or modification. All that being said, thank you very much, and we will see you guys in the next episode. You guys have a good one.